The blizzard came without warning, the way it often did in the Montana Territory. One moment the sky was clear and cold, the next it was a wall of white fury that swallowed everything in its path. Thomas Brennan had seen enough winters to know when to take shelter, but he also knew that anyone caught out in weather like this wouldn't last the night. He was chopping wood behind his small cabin when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it over the howling wind. A cry for help, thin and desperate, carried on the brutal gusts. Thomas dropped his axe and squinted into the white chaos, seeing nothing but swirling snow. There it was again, closer this time. Help! Please! Without thinking, Thomas grabbed the rope from his porch, the one he kept tied to the house for exactly this reason, and ventured into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and stinging his eyes. He moved carefully, one hand on the rope, the other reaching blindly into the whiteness. His fingers found fabric first, then a trembling shoulder. The woman had collapsed not 50 yards from his door, half buried in a snowdrift. Her fine wool coat was no match for the savage cold, and her lips had already turned blue. Thomas didn't waste time with questions. He hauled her over his shoulder and followed the rope back to the cabin, fighting the wind with every step. Inside, his children stared in shock. Laura, 12 years old with her mother's quick mind and her father's stubborn chin, rushed to help. 9-year-old Daniel stood frozen by the fireplace, his eyes wide. Laura, get every blanket we have. Daniel, stoke that fire until it's roaring. Move! Thomas laid the stranger on the floor near the hearth, the warmest spot in the cabin. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair plastered to her pale face. Her breathing was shallow, her skin like ice. He'd seen frostbite before, seen what the cold could do to a person if you weren't careful. Laura, bring me warm water. Not hot. Warm. And towels. His daughter moved with practiced efficiency. Life on the frontier had made her grow up fast, especially after her mother died 2 years ago. Thomas pushed the thought away. There was no time for old grief now. He worked methodically, removing the woman's frozen boots and gloves, checking her extremities for frostbite. Her fingers were pale but not blackened, a good sign. Laura appeared with a basin of water and clean cloths, and together they began the slow process of warming the stranger. Who is she, Pa? Daniel asked, his voice small. Don't know, son. But she's somebody's daughter, maybe somebody's mother. That's enough. The woman's eyes fluttered open once, unfocused and glassy. She mumbled something incoherent before slipping back into unconsciousness. Thomas wrapped her in the patchwork quilt his late wife had made, the one with squares of red, blue, and gold that had warmed their family through countless winters. The blizzard raged for 3 days. Thomas kept vigil by the stranger's side, monitoring her breathing, making sure she drank when she woke. Laura cooked thin soups and helped change the woman's clothes for dry ones. Daniel fetched water and kept the fire fed with wood from their dwindling supply. On the morning of the 4th day, the stranger opened her eyes fully. They were gray, like storm clouds, and they fixed on Thomas with sharp intelligence. Where am I? Her voice was rough from disuse. My cabin, about 20 miles west of Helena. You collapsed in the blizzard. Been out for 3 days. She tried to sit up, winced, and lay back down. My horse. Haven't seen any horse. You were alone when I found you. The woman closed her eyes, and for a moment Thomas thought she might cry. Instead, she took a deep breath and opened them again. My name is Catherine. Catherine Hartwell. I need to get to Helena. Not in this weather, ma'am. Storms passed, but there's 4 feet of fresh snow out there. We're snowed in for at least a week, maybe 2. You don't understand. I have business. Important business. Thomas stirred the fire, his jaw set. Ma'am, with respect, your important business won't matter if you're dead. You'll stay here until it's safe to travel. Catherine studied him, this rough frontiersman with calloused hands and patient eyes. His cabin was small but clean, patched together with care. The children were thin but healthy, their clothes mended but neat. Poor, she realized, but not destitute. Not yet. I can pay you for your trouble, she said. Thomas frowned. Didn't ask for payment. Common decency doesn't come with a price tag. Over the next week, as Catherine regained her strength, she learned about the Brennan family. Thomas worked a small plot of land, barely enough to feed his children through the winter. His wife had died of fever 2 years past, leaving him to raise Laura and Daniel alone. They had no neighbors for miles, no family to help. Yet they shared what little they had without hesitation. Catherine watched Laura teach Daniel his letters by firelight, using a precious stub of pencil and the back of an old newspaper. She saw Thomas split his own portion of dinner to make sure his children ate enough. She noticed how the cabin's roof leaked in one corner, how the children's shoes were too small, how they made do with almost nothing. She said nothing, but she remembered everything. On the 8th day, Catherine felt strong enough to reveal part of her truth. "I wasn't entirely honest about why I need to reach Helena," she said as Thomas prepared the evening meal. "I'm not just going there. I live there. Or rather, I own most of it." Thomas paused, his knife hovering over a potato. "Come again." "My late husband was Malcolm Hartwell. Perhaps you've heard the name." Laura gasped. Even in their isolated cabin, they knew that name. Malcolm Hartwell had been a railroad magnate, a mining tycoon, a man whose wealth was legendary throughout the territory. "He died 6 months ago," Catherine continued quietly. "Left me everything. His businesses, his properties, his fortune. I've been traveling between our various holdings, trying to understand what I now control. I was returning to Helena when the storm caught me." Thomas sat down heavily. "You're telling me I've had the richest woman in Montana Territory sleeping on my floor?" "Yes. And you've treated me with more genuine kindness than I've received from anyone since Malcolm died." Catherine's voice cracked slightly. "Everyone wants something. Everyone sees the money first, the woman second. But you just saw someone who needed help." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling fire. "Doesn't change anything," Thomas said finally. "You needed help, we gave it. That's the end of it." But it wasn't the end, and Catherine made sure of that. 2 weeks later, when the snow had melted enough to make travel possible, a contingent from Helena arrived with horses, supplies, and warm clothes. They'd been searching for Catherine since she disappeared. The relief on their faces was genuine, their deference absolute. Before she left, Catherine took Thomas aside. "I'm going to send someone back with supplies. Medicine, food, whatever you need to get through the winter." "Ma'am, that's not necessary." "It's Catherine, and yes it is. You saved my life. Thomas Brennan. Let me help your family in return. We manage just fine." She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the pride that kept his back straight even as his children went without. "You're managing, yes. But you're drowning, and you're too stubborn to admit it. Let me throw you a rope, the way you threw me one." Thomas was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. What arrived the following week wasn't just supplies. It was opportunity. Catherine had purchased the land adjacent to Thomas's plot and deeded it to him, expanding his farm to a workable size. She'd arranged for a teacher to visit the remote cabins in the area twice a month, starting with the Brennans. She'd quietly paid off the debt Thomas had been carrying at the general store in the nearest town. But she didn't stop there. Over the following months, as Catherine settled into her role managing her late husband's empire, she sought Thomas's advice. Not about business, she had advisors for that, but about the people who worked her mines, who rode her railroads, who lived in the communities her companies dominated. "You understand something my late husband never did," she told Thomas one spring afternoon when she visited the cabin again. "That wealth means nothing if the people who create it are suffering. Show me how to do better." Together, they implemented changes. Better wages for miners. Safer working conditions. Pensions for injured workers. Schools in company towns. It wasn't charity. Catherine made sure everyone knew that. It was investment in the people who made everything possible. Thomas never accepted money for himself beyond fair payment for his consultation, but he never had to. His farm thrived on the expanded land. Laura received a scholarship to a prestigious school back east, though she chose to stay and help her father instead. Daniel grew strong and tall, his quick mind finally given the education it deserved. Years later, when people asked Catherine Hartwell why she'd reformed her late husband's business practices, why she'd become known as the territory's most progressive employer, she always told them the same story. "I was lost in a blizzard once," she'd say. "A man with nothing saved me, expecting nothing in return. He taught me that true wealth isn't what you have in your bank account. It's what you do when someone needs help, even when you can barely help yourself. Especially then." Thomas Brennan never thought of himself as anything special. He was just a man who'd done what anyone should do, extend a hand to someone in need. But in doing so, he'd saved more than one life. He'd reminded the wealthiest woman in the territory what really mattered, and together, they'd changed countless others. The cabin still stood, long after Thomas and Catherine were gone, a testament to the night a single father rescued a stranger and discovered that sometimes the greatest fortunes are found not in gold or silver, but in simple human decency.